Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our February meeting, and you can see that we have been very, very careful to make ourselves COVID safe. So I'm pleased to see that everyone was able to come along and wear your masks. You're allowed to take your mask off if you have to talk on the microphone. So come elbowing your way out the front here, and you can have the microphone. I have two guests to welcome this evening. Virginia McBride, welcome. Wave her hand. She's intending to join us, so please be kind to her. And then our other guest is Sandra Nelson, who came last time, and she's come again, but I don't think, I might be able to persuade her to join me, we don't know yet. So welcome Sandra. Another round of applause, please. On a sadder note, though, most of you, I think, would know or have heard of the passing of Lorraine Hall. It was mentioned in the bulletin a couple of weeks ago. And Lorraine and her husband, Ken, were foundation members of our society, and were hugely valued in all of the work that they did for us. Lorraine did not enjoy great health, and I think she had about 30 years of ill health. And towards the end of her life, she had the sadness of losing her husband and then her son. So it has been quite a journey for her, but I believe that she was a very positive person and just soldiered on, as many people do. I've been told that there is going to be a memorial service for Lorraine on Friday, and it will be at 10:30 in Holy Trinity Church in Bay Street. So if anyone would like to attend, I'm sure you'll be most welcome. I also thought that some people tonight may not have met Lorraine or know anything about her. I'm actually in that position. I only saw her in the distance on a couple of occasions. So I wondered if there may be one or two people who would like to tell us a little bit about a memory that they have that stands out in their mind about Lorraine. Don't panic if there's dead silence. Yes. Susie.
I will, just because she's one of the first people that I met when I came to Port Melbourne, and certainly she's one of the memorable people from the first meeting I attended, and I know there'll be other people. She and Heather Whale did the supper for years. And if you come from the country like me, you sort of tend to go and help with the supper. And of course, I helped with washing up a few cups. And that's how I got to know two of the finest women, I think, in Port Melbourne. And she was one of those understated people, in my opinion, but always there. And she and her husband Ken are, two of the people who absolutely made me feel part of Port Melbourne. They had a real gift for that. She used to talk about where they lived, that they used to just be able to, which I can't remember the name of the street even, but they could see all the way out and just see the ships coming in from where they were. And absolutely, lovely, one of those classic, one of the reasons we're all here probably today as a member of the society. So,
thank you. Was there someone else? I thought I saw someone else waving who would like to say something. Just Susie. Okay. Thank you very much. It's given us a bit of a better idea of Lorraine's contribution. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. So I'll continue with the agenda, and we have some apologies from David and Leanna Thompson, Anne-Marie Richardson, Sue and John Mack, Glenn Cosham, Anne Gibson, Carol Lay, Max and Marilyn Allport, and Marie Chalmers. Is there anyone else who needs to be added to the apologies list? Okay, thank you. And so item number 3 is the acceptance of the minutes from the 26th of January, and I have to apologise for my error because I wrote down that our new member, Jeanette Fly, I've put an R in its place, so I do apologise for that. We will fix that, and we won't ever do it again, I promise. So can someone move that the minutes are correct, please, with that correction? Margaret, thank you. And a seconder? Oh, thank you, Jack. The matters arising from minutes, we really did not have many matters because we're all excited and trying to get onto trivia as soon as we could. But I put the artisans market on the agenda because I mentioned at the meeting that the Business Association were thinking of running another artisans market during the year. So I asked George, in his capacity as, is it Secretary of the Business Association? Secretarial, to come and tell you all about it.
Thank you, Sue. Unfortunately, there won't be one at this early. It was all the excitement of hosting one after COVID, and everyone got so excited, particularly the business community and the association and its members. Unfortunately, it's a huge logistical exercise organising something of that scale, because there's lots of shareholders. And anyway, we thought, let's just stick to the once, and it'll be held in November again. As we come close to the date, it'll be announced, but let's just wait for this COVID scenario to ease a little. Hopefully everyone's got the vaccine by then and we can get a COVID normal life. So yeah, at this stage, it'll be held in November, and just stay tuned for further developments. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, George. As I said last meeting, it was very successful. The artisans market was very successful from our point of view because we made over, it was $1,300, I think, so it's a good earner. If we can't have sausage sizzles, we can certainly go to the market. So on reports, the Treasurer's report.
Okay, I'll just go from memory because I've been using my phone to record this tonight, and it's on my phone. So but basically we made $5,968. 5,400 of that was a grant from the Port Phillip City Council. Normally we would have had that a bit earlier in the year, but because of COVID and everything that was happening, it was a bit delayed, but we've received it now. And we also had about $540 worth of sales. So that was good, still selling lots of calendars up until just recently. And the balance of the account from memory is about $16,600. So move my $16,600. Okay, thank you very much. I'll move that be accepted.
Accepted. And can I have a seconder, please? Thank you. And then Susie is going to give us a report about the acquisitions that we've had. Susie?
I do. Not to use the what? Oh, yes. There are some people in the room who don't trust me, and one is sitting right there and the other's looking at me very carefully. It's all right, I promise. Okay, just to read this out very seriously, I'm doing this for Glenn Cosham, as he is really the convener of the Acquisitions Committee, and he and Anne are both unable to be here. I would just like to say that we are still getting things given to us, and we are also, Anne and I, trying to catalogue them, as there was the mention that perhaps, there was no rush to catalogue things, but in fact we've been down that line before when things have mounted up too much, and that's when things go awry, apropos of the missing list perhaps, but you never know. So I'll just read this out. There were quite a few things. Pat Granger donated various ephemera relating to the Port Melbourne Film Society. I think that's rather good. Numerous family photos of the Suckling family from Graham Street, Lorraine Bloom. Some related to World War II will be passed on to the Australian War Museum because they don't really relate necessarily to Port Melbourne and more general, but they're rather good. 2 City of Port Melbourne stickers from Fred Nicholson, and they're quite large, and we believe they might have been sort of the sort of sticker that was put on a vehicle like the electrical contractor or something or other like that for the city. John May's donated a few things, and I really am regretting not asking him to wear this. his Boy Scouts tunic from 1952 and 53. I'm feeling most remiss. Yes, John?
No, that's a salute.
Oh, that's a salute. Oh.
That's a salute. That's not me. Yeah, you've got to be in the Scouts or the Brownies, that's right.
I was a brownie, I wasn't a scout.
orientation.
Yes, thank you. He also has a framed print of a sandwich scene, 4 photos of the Narana from John, plus something else, which I won't tell you about now. One drawing of the layout of the Malcolm Moore factory in Bertie Street from Tony Cranter. I can't read that, sorry. One trophy of winners of the Port Melbourne Festival Sprint, 1977-1978 boys. We may have somebody, that's from Rod Lawson. A digital copy of the Flannery family history, lest we forget, from Robin Flannery. Danger point. And one digital copy of the Raven and Clune family history from Ted Raven. And there will be more items to discuss later. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Susie.
No, do I give it to you? Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. Correspondence, you'll see that we had a very nice email from Councillor Marcus Pearl, who said that he really enjoyed Trivia Night. And it was great to have 2 of our councillors there, both Marcus and Heather Consola came along that night. Heritage Under Thread, I'm not aware of any items at this point, but perhaps someone will have something that they need us to know about? Maybe with COVID, nobody's had time to go and knock things down or something. And other business and announcements. Does anyone have any more business or announcements to make? Well, it looks like the archive people are about to take over again. So Susie, we'll start with you, followed by David, and then Johnny and Judith. Thank you. And we'll get out of the way.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to use this? I think that might be better.
Hello, does that work? Right. As an enthusiastic tennis viewer, I started thinking about being able to find something in the collection that related to tennis. And I'm afraid I've only found one small picture. And I know that Helen Barry has talked about it, but really I could have, it's before my time. So as a teacher, I came wearing my 60s Dunlop volleys. They are now purple for fancy dress, but they are original. And I have my Pancho Gonzalez tennis racket. Now, even if you are not interested in the tennis, you must be interested in technology. And believe me, we are a long way from what happens today. Even if I do have a tartan cover for my tennis racket. But if you'd like to see the photo, we don't have a lot. We think we've got quite a lot because the original clubs seem to have been the bowling and tennis club. And then the table tennis club got in there as well. So they all seem to have been combined in the early days. But one of the other items that John gave us this time was some letters. Members of the society go and talk to the primary school about how things were in earlier days. And I know we all know as you older and older you get, you see things slightly differently. And I am fascinated by, the structure of the tennis racket is completely different now. And I'm an ex-science teacher, so I'm busily reading a book, yet another book about the periodic table, right up until recent times. So it's quite interesting, and there is a technological connection to this. Dear John, thank you for coming to talk to us about Port Melbourne. Clearly a good writer. We thought your talk was very interesting and learnt a lot. We really liked the things you said about Port Melbourne Primary School and all the things that have changed. Signed Grade 1 and Grade 2, Port Melbourne Primary School, the fetching drawing. John teached us they had to rip a page out of a phone book to go to the toilet paper, and they didn't have that much money. Alex. I learned about the Westgate Bridge, which fell down, and 37 people, very sad, that was very grim, that part. They had no internet, and they wore children. But the interesting thing is, in technology, I learnt about how to make a football from John. Number 1, find the newspaper. 2, suss it up. I think that means crush it up and make it wet. 3, because I've got the blessing of the drawings. 3, play with it. And they really enjoyed that because there is a large collection in, this is John talking to them, there is a large collection of over the time, and there are various people. I'm very sad because Glenn Cosham couldn't remember that he'd done it, and I found one during the acquisitions meeting, and it said to Glenn, thank you for coming to the talk to talk to us about growing up in Port Melbourne. We learned so many interesting things, like how you used to play this cowboy game on the road, and every Saturday you used to go to a picture show. And Glenn said, I was always dressed up as a cowboy, you know? And they always talk about the football, and then some girls were naughty at school, and they used to pull their desks up and hit you on the back. And I think they said that about to you. You must have said that, John, perhaps. Terry Keenan's done a lot of it too. And of course, a house and cart used to deliver the milk to you. And it would last only one day. Shocking, you know. Terry was the drummer for when the children marched to line up. Now, Terry is not here, but I am really going to approach Terry on that subject of musical work. Did anyone know that about Terry? I certainly didn't. Now, there's a lot of pages, and I'm not going to go on because the others are really interesting. But the football, the technology of paper mache, sticking it together, tying it up with string or elastic bands, is throughout them all. I think that's rather good. So that's me. And I think one of the... David is going to be next, and this is really interesting.
Good. So, back to the story. What I'm going to do is, as I said, tell you about these books. You can see that's the rough years that they're available. So, brief bit of history. Public reading room was first mooted back about 1853, and then a couple of years after local government was established in these parts, Bylaw 14 was to establish a free library. What does that matter? Well, to put it in context, Bylaw 13 was about stopping the nuisance of things being thrown into the former lagoon, now former lagoon. So that was a very big deal. So 14 to come one after that meant this must have been fairly important. However, nothing came of it. So in 1883, the idea came up again. In July of that year, the first librarian was appointed. In August, it was officially opened, and by some, I just picked out one number here, there's 900 odd people were going to it a year later. So, let's look a little bit at these books, and I'm going to use them to unpack some stories. So why are these interesting beyond just an object in themselves? So they're interesting because they tell us something about the librarians, and you're going to hear about 3 librarians. This is the first one, William Cleary, with the years there. And as you get into it, it shows something about them in the sense of their hand, how they wrote, and I'll tell you another story. The signatures, if you look on the right-hand side, are quite variable, and so you get a sense if you have an ancestor who lived here or who lived in your house 100 years ago, you might be able to find out who they are and see whether they came to the library and what their signature was like, and that tells you a lot about a person. There are adult signatures, there are children's signatures. We could start to think about, well, how often did people come to the library? Who came to the library? Were women allowed in the library? That's still a mystery to me as to whether they were or they weren't. And again, what the frequency might have been. So I'll unpack some of these now. So here's 2 pages side by side. You've seen some of the signatures, and again on the left is the signature, on the right is the address, and there's 2 pages. And you can have a quick look at the signatures, just glance down on either left, and you see there's quite a variety, so there's quite a lot of information in there. The things I've highlighted in yellow, I probably don't expect people at the back to read, but I'll read it out to you. That's the address column. Later on, the address tended to be Port Melbourne, so it doesn't tell you much, but those ones I've highlighted. So the very top one on the left hand says Burwood, New South Wales. The one that's a double directly under that, the top one says Sandwich, and the person underneath has said their address is Port Melbourne. Okay, so now here's a quiz. This is February 1884. Why could somebody be confused about Sandwich? Quick answers from the floor. I can see Margaret knows the answer. Why would that be?
Well, because the change either was in the process of being made or had just been made.
Yeah, so it changed from being the borough of Sandwich to Port Melbourne in January 84. So that's really interesting that 2 people, one above the other. Some of the ones further down, I've got actual addresses.
What's the date of that one, Dave?
That one is February 1884, 21st of February. So it's 3 weeks later, a month later. There's a few people down in the ones I've marked again. I don't expect you to be able to see, it's more to remind me. They've got actual street addresses, and most of the rest just write Port Melbourne, and after a while they don't do. So you don't find much address information, unfortunately. But the one on the right is interesting because if you can see the one on the top right, address, it says Russia. So they came a long way to avail themselves. By the way, there was a fight going on at the time because we had a free library, but our cousins up on the hill there, South Melbourne, did not yet have a free library. It had a mechanics institute, but not a library. And of course, somebody always spills the ink. So on the right you can see one of the pages, and on the left, for those who remember, blotting paper. So this is what the library, so the building, not this building, that building there, was finished in 1882. And so the library came into a relatively new building, and when it was designed, the upper floor, that is to say, the council chamber and the place where we met, that continuous room where we normally hold our meetings, that was the reading room in the library. Now, the councillors soon set about changing that arrangement, but that's what it was designed as. And the room downstairs, which is now the toy library, was the librarian's room in the original setup. So again, diverging a little from the books, but we'll come back to them. There's another piece in our collection, which happens to be some minutes from the borough, and it's got what everybody got paid. To make it easier, I'll put it on the right-hand side there. So you can see the librarians at the bottom got paid £52 a year, and you can see the relative pecking order, with obviously the rate collector getting the most. So it gives you some idea of what people were paid. The librarian looks to me like it was somebody who was sort of semi-retired, or was a sort of an okay income if you had some other means. Now, the first librarian I said was William Cleary. The second one was a character called Thomas Mayflower Crisp. Well, with that name, you've got no chance, have you? So, Crisp, what I'm showing you here is the top page of one of the books where the librarian writes in the date. And immediately compared with the other ones, you get some idea of the personality of Mayflower Crisp. And now I'll tell you a story about Mayflower Crisp. That's a picture of a Bible, not the actual Bible. So you've got to put yourself in that room next door where we normally meet, and you've got to imagine there's bookshelves going up the walls, and there's books at all heights. Here's a story from the Herald, September 1898. The gentleman in charge of the Port Melbourne Free Library, that's Thomas Mayflower Crisp, is well known in the district for his urbanity and fondness of a joke. A night or two ago, Mr. Murphy, clerk of courts, was wandering around in search of a Bible on which to administer the oath to someone applying for some sort of legal document that required an oath. At last, he struck upon the library, and on interrogating the librarian on the subject, his attention was directed to an ancient volume weighing half a hundredweight or so, lying on one of the shelves up high. "What use is that?" exclaimed the court officer. Why? I'd need a crane and a chain tackle to move it. Finding that there was nothing else for it, the individual who wanted to swear climbed the ladder, kissed the book, and the necessary formalities were thus concluded. So that's interesting things happen in life. One of the reasons why I got into this collection was in writing the book that I've just completed. I was wanting to know whether some of the people who lived in the houses around us used to go to the library. And here's one page that really struck me, because there are three people, one next door, that's Rudolf Borowski, which I won't say much about, buy the book. But anyway, interesting to me. But down the bottom, perhaps more interesting to the sporting types, is Tom and Rob Cleland. Now, Cleland's, James Cleland was a plumber. That they lived in Spring Street East near us originally, then they went across to Clark Street. But the boys basically grew up in Spring Street East, and two of them there, Tom and Rob, both went off to the First World War, but prior to that, Rob played for Port Melbourne. There was a very sporting family there, and all sorts of swimming and you name it, that family did it. But in Terry Keenan's book, where Terry comes up with the team for the first quarter century of the club, okay, Rob is in that. So this is someone of import in our part of the world. So these are the sort of little interesting things. I calculated that Tom would have been about 8-year-old, and Rob might have been about 10-year-old at the time of the signing. So, connected to this, but going to a slightly different part of the collection, we get to the third librarian, George Games Prosser. He'd been a librarian in the British Army. He'd been with Kitchener and other things. He came to Australia where some of his family was. He got a job in Parramatta as a librarian. Under strange circumstances, he left there, ended up down here, and he got the job. But there were 73 applicants. And what you see on the left is the cover of the minute book. On the right is the little sign-off that says, this is the person we're going to hire. But how did they decide between 72? Well, they sat down and they had little votes and cross votes, and they put all the little votes. So in the minute book, there are pages and pages of how they did the voting. Now, I don't think this is good practice, would be recommended practice in HR circles today to record some of these internal, or maybe it would, I'm not certain. I'm just saying it's interesting what you can discover. It was obviously a bit of a boring meeting, because on several of these pages people were doodling and all sorts of other things. So, of course, this is now how we check into the library. If we've been checking in the last couple of days or so, we don't sign in anymore. We hold our smartphones up to one of these, which gives me an excuse just to point you, if you weren't aware of it, that the library is going through a draft action plan, and they're looking for inputs. And on the right, I won't read it, but you can read the grand vision for this library in 2026. So It's been around for quite a while, so if you like the library and you want to contribute to it, I encourage you to go to the Port Phillip webpage and put your 10 penn'orth worth in. So that's basically all I wanted to say, and I just wanted to thank all those people who bothered to keep the books so that we could look at them today. Thank you. I'll leave these somewhere out here so you can glance at them on the way out.
Good evening. They say an ounce of luck is better than a ton of judgment. We had a bit of luck on one of our meetings one night. Somebody had the smart idea that we should have some podcasts of a lot of our speakers, etc., etc. Now, what do I know about podcasts? They're right on a stamp. But luckily we've got some smart people in this society. So I thought of a friend of ours, a member of ours, Jim Sinclair. Jim was born and bred in the borough, in Graham Street. And Jim spoke one night with us, but he had trouble driving from Mount Waverley at night time, as you can appreciate, particularly in winter. But he came out and did a mighty job. He was also a veteran athletic champion, which he never mentioned because that's a nice man that he is. But we had to draw some of his guts out of him, to say. And he was wonderful because he was in his 90s and he was working still in Port Melbourne at 94th year. Admittedly, most times from home, because he was driving into port most days, and what was happening to him, he'd lose half a day because he'd drive around reminiscing what was there, what wasn't there, what's there now, which I think we're all guilty of that, people that moved away. Because once you're born and bred in port, you never move away. So someone came up with the idea that we should do some podcasts of people of interest. So I came up, well, what about Jim Sinclair? Because I knew Jim only had maybe the most a year to live. He told me that himself, so that's why I knew it was correct. I wasn't guessing. And Janet thought it was a great idea, and she's the podcast champion. So we went out to Jim's house, luckily about 3 months before he died. And the ounce of luck we're talking about is that we discovered a Port Melbourne gem. And on that note, I'll let Janet explain it all to you in greater detail.
Well, timing is everything. I think it was a break even in the lockdown when Johnny and I had the opportunity to interview Jim Sinclair. So, we just caught that moment. But in order to give some context to the very significant donation that Jim Sinclair made to us, I thought that I needed to paint a bit of context and just take note of the date that it is today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this very, very significant period in Australian history between December and February, December 1941 and February 1942. So in these 3 months were concentrated so many issues of strategic importance to Australia, beginning with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And I'm sorry to look back here, and then Australia declaring war on Japan. And you might remember that David Radcliffe made a very great presentation about the visit of the Repulse and the Hood to Port Melbourne in 1924. And there on the 10th of December 1941, the Repulse was sunk near Singapore. And then, so the threat of Japanese invasion was just growing and growing all the time. And Australia's whole defence hung on the impregnability of Singapore. And it had always been thought that if the attack came on Singapore, it would be from the sea. And so all the defences, the naval defences, faced outwards to sea. And no one anticipated that the threat would actually come from the Japanese moving through the Malaya Peninsula down to Singapore. So the advance was so rapid, it was so quick, and with it, the level of tension and apprehension in Australia was growing all the time. Meanwhile, although of course we were in alliance with Britain, Australia's main fighting forces, the 6th and the 7th Division, were in Europe and in North Africa. And Curtin, who became Prime Minister in October, was very keen to get those troops back to Australia. But Churchill had other ideas. He wanted to retain those troops for the defence of England and keep them in Europe. And so, you know, these days, you know, as those children's references reminded us, you know, we rely on the internet, email, that swift communication. But Curtin and Churchill, you know, they're just sending, they're sending these cables back and forth, with Curtin insisting that those Australian troops needed to be brought home for the defence of Australia. But Churchill, although he was sometimes saying the right thing, actually was pretty clear in his mind that the priority for those Australian troops was the defence of Europe. So this was the situation around Christmas in 1941. And this was when, you know, some of you may know this speech was Curtin sensing that British help was not available, with Singapore having fallen, the Japanese march continuing down the peninsula, that he turned to America. And he made this very, very famous, the defining speech in terms of Australia's relationship with the US. And he said, "Without any inhibitions of any kind, I make it quite clear that Australia looks to America, free of any pangs as to our traditional links with the United Kingdom." Churchill was furious because, you know, this was not in the spirit of the alliance as far as he saw it. Anyway, Curtin insisted those troops came back. They were on their way back, and Churchill still felt that the priority for those troops was in Burma rather than in New Guinea. But Curtin insisted, and right he was to insist, because had they gone to Burma, Burma had already been taken by the Japanese. So this was the context in late December 1941. And Curtin was just totally oppressed by the strain of, you know, feeling the responsibility he had to the Australian people and knowing how grave the threat was. And then on the 19th of February, you know, it's something that you'd all be well aware of, the Japanese attack on Darwin. So people in Australia were beginning to feel mighty, mighty vulnerable. And, you know, the war, which had been a bit of a kind of phony war up until that point, became very, very real. And yes, so then this wasn't publicly known at the time, but at dawn on the 26th of February, so it would have just been later this week, an anniversary, a Japanese surveillance plane, a reconnaissance plane, took off from a submarine near King Island and did a perfect reconnaissance of the whole of Port Phillip Bay, you know, and the plane was sighted from Point Cook, but, you know, kind of no one knew what to do. People were just completely taken unawares, and there was no one to give the authority to take any action. And the, you know, the Japanese insignia was very clear to see. And at times the pilot actually dropped from the clouds to a height of just 300 meters and cruised the whole of Port Phillip Bay, going over Port Melbourne, Victoria Harbour, you know, Victoria Dock, and so on. But this was not known to people. It wasn't in the paper, it wasn't in the news, but there was rumour, People had seen it, you know, many people had seen it, but it wasn't confirmed by anyone. So this is the context that we're talking about. So now to return to Jim Sinclair, or as his birth name, James William Sinclair. Now he started working when he was a young man. He worked for John Sharp Timber Company. And one of the things I found most amazing about our interview was one of his early jobs on South Wharf was he was a penciler. I mean, have you ever heard of a, oh, well, Margaret's heard of a penciler, but I've never heard of a penciler before. So when the timber came in at South Wharf, it wasn't all in a container like it is now, it was all in bits and pieces. And there were two men whose job it was to measure that the timber that was supposed to be arriving was arriving. So they'd measure the timber and they'd call out the measurement to Jim and he'd make a note. He was a penciler. So he'd actually started working, this was an amusing part of the interview. Like many young people in Port Melbourne, he had a paper round, but he'd kind of subcontracted it to about 3 other people. And he was actually making more from his paper round than when he actually started formal employment. So Jim said that something that had benefited him a great deal was participating in the settlement. Now you may have heard about the settlement. It was kind of, you know, a place where young people could go, and according to him would be given quite significant responsibilities for an area of work. So it might be carpentry or a bit of a library, and it sounds like he derived a great deal of you know, companionship, meaning, association through being part of that settlement. And he attributed his decision to sign up to when that closed, just when the war began, the settlement closed. And when he wanted to sign up, he asked his mother, and she said no. He asked his father said yes. And then he went to enlist, but no luck. He was only 17. So he obviously persisted and became 18 in the meantime. So the actual date that he enlisted was the 10th of March, 1942. So I can't help wondering whether this sort of atmosphere of apprehension and fear was part of what influenced him to go to enlist in active service. And when they asked him, they asked him what he wanted to do, or he said he would prefer to be a driver, but they didn't give him that position. Instead, they put him in the signals. And, you know, that's probably what saved his life and enabled him to continue to live so long. So he had 3 tours of duty. It wasn't Papua New Guinea then, it was New Guinea and New Britain. So 2 in New Guinea and 2 in New Britain. And when he was in, and just sort of going back to these dates here a little bit, the Japanese took Rabaul in New Britain in February 1942. So there's a lot constellating around February 1942. And it was the year in which Curtin said in that same speech, You know, we've now got to move the whole of Australia onto a war footing, you know, efficiently, you know, with purpose. So this was in 1942. So anyway, so I'm going to do the big reveal now. So when he was in Rabaul, he was in a tunnel. He said, I found it, the map, in a tunnel in Rabaul, where the Japanese, I'm quoting directly from him now, where the Japanese had a lot of people. They just about joined every hill with a tunnel, and most of them were packed with stuff. I used to wander through, being very careful, mind you, because you didn't want to get yourself blown up. And I found these maps. I thought, that looks familiar. It's in English with Japanese stuff on it too. So this is the map that Jim Sinclair gifted to us. And I'm just going to go a bit in. So just looking at the map in more detail, you can see quite clearly up there on the left, Port Melbourne, and the whole map, actually, the focus of the map is in Port Melbourne. And you'll see those kind of dot things there, which other people who've looked at this map suspect may have been places where torpedoes could have been launched from. And something that we perhaps don't think about with Port Melbourne so much today is just what a strategic location it was during the war. There was the piers, the shipping, the fuel storage tanks, and then, you know, all the industries that were here. You know, we had GMH, Dunlops, etc., highly strategic industries. And so it's no wonder that Port Melbourne was such a focus of interest to them. And I just want to show one more picture. This is the stamp that was on the back of the map, and my Japanese neighbour kindly assisted me to have a look at it. And if you see on the left, where the 9 would be on a clock, there's an anchor, you know, indicating that there's a hydro, you know, a map for navigation and depths and things like that. But what was quite intriguing to me was, you see the letter 17 there, and she explained that that actually means the Shoyu or something, the emperor, 17, the year 17 of the emperor, and that year is 1942. So there was also an indication on it, she said, that it looked like it had been stamped as if complete, finished. And so I just thought it was quite extraordinary, in fact quite goosebumpy, to think that almost on the anniversary of this reconnaissance flight over Port Melbourne, that we're looking at this map when we're about to, you know, acknowledge this very, very significant anniversary. So we've subsequently learned that the State Library also has a copy of this map, but our map has got this very particular association with someone who lived had this long and very deep association with Port Melbourne. And so it's a real treasure, which I now hold up, and perhaps we can put it on the table up. Yeah, so there it is. And I think it had been, Johnny knew he had it. Johnny knows everything. He knew he had it. And, you know, it was one of those very sort of sensitive moments, because it was apparent that he was in very, very poor health. And, you know, imagine this map was just in a pile of magazines or something, that just in a careless moment the whole lot could have been chucked out or something. And so Johnny had the sensitivity to, you know, inquire about the map, and that elicited his response to say, I'd like to give it to you.
Thanks, Janet. We were a very bit lucky because Jim was going to give it to the RSL, where he lives over in, where would you go to, Janet? Where do you live? I forget myself now. Where Jim lives? Bentley, yes. And I just casually mentioned, oh, it'd be lovely to be in Port Melbourne. And straight away his eyes lit up and we got it. So it was fantastic. And I was mightily pleased because I've known Jim well over 70 years, family friend, and there's a strange quirk of fate. When Jim got married, he moved 2 doors and lived in Percy White, our first president's house, or Percy's parents' house in Graham Street. So we had a lot of Putnam connections there all the way through. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Janet.
This is working. How lucky are we, again, to have such wonderful members who have great knowledge and can share it with us in such an interesting way. So I would like all 4 presenters to come to the front, please. Now, I have a small presentation for you. I made sure that it was COVID friendly, and it says thank you, and it's some hand sanitizer for you.
Well done, Sue.
Now, hang on a minute, and while they're still here, it may be that some of you have questions or comments that you would like to address to our speakers. So, firstly, perhaps Susie, has anyone got any questions or comments to Susie about her tennis rackets and the presentation?
I probably should have mentioned that a lot of other people probably have spoken for the trial.
Remember the cost of it. Does she remember the cost of the
Oh,
racket?
the tennis racket.
The price.
I was given it, of course. I was a very small
That
child.
little gift horse in the mouth.
Yeah.
And I can say snap because the same thing happened to me. I was just given a racket like that, one little wooden one, and I had a tartan cover too. It must have been handy those out.
And there were tennis courts everywhere in Canada where I grew up. There were that was in the era when everybody, however badly, played tennis.
That's right. Yeah.
And I said to Johnny, May I have this program from Wimbledon from 1971, because I went the year after, and virtually every champion is an Australian. It's Yvonne Goolagong, John Newcomb, all of those. It was just fantastic, but I couldn't find it in the heat of the moment, which I found.
Okay, thank you, Susie. Does anyone have any questions of David with his remarkable work with people in the library?
Not a question so much, but I'm looking forward to looking at the book to look for some of the
Yes.
family names that I'll probably know.
Yes. Yes. And I was interested that 2 little boys had beautiful handwriting, the 2 that you mentioned. So.
Yeah, you'll see that throughout the book. You can see they've obviously been practicing at school. It's not quite copperplate, but you remember when you used to try to write like that.
Yes. And I like the flamboyant librarian, the one with the double barrel name. Beautiful writing there. Thank you. And what about for Johnny and Janet? Any questions? Yes?
I've got a question. The provenance of our map is so incredibly interesting. Is there any idea how many of these maps would exist?
I actually, it's got a stamp on the back here.
Yeah, I actually thought it would be interesting to follow this up with the Stag Library, because I thought that perhaps there would be heaps more on the Stag Library website than there was, but there's actually, because you can see that it actually wasn't a Japanese map. It was actually a British map that had been annotated. So, yeah, you'd think there's a big story around this map. Yeah, so it'd be worth pursuing.
And the tunnels,
Might have been half-hitched.
yeah. What else was in the tunnels?
I don't know. I mean, I think this is the thing. I don't know if Johnny feels the same way, but when you're conducting an interview with someone, you know, they're clearly not very well, you've got a lot of, and you know, you read it afterwards and you think, oh, why didn't I ask that question? But you know, you just do
The reason for the tunnels were the Japanese removed their troops without being seen and shot at.
But you said there was so much stuff in there as well.
Yeah.
It was interesting, wasn't it?
Probably boxes or whatever, you know, probably munitions, because they cleaned the Japanese out at that stage.
Well, he said that, didn't he? He said something about he didn't want to blow himself up.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes.
It would have been booby-trapped, I would have thought, yeah.
That's the first thing I mentioned to him, actually. They said, gee, you want to be careful because they're cunning devils, they leave explosives and tripwires or whatever. He said, I was more than careful. I said, I come from port. A funny man and a good man, gentleman. But so he's still working at 94. Sharp was attacked, but he knew he was dying and he handled it quite well.
Jenna, don't get sent Joe. I spent a bit of time in Japan in the 80s and 90s when I was working for a fish cannery, and one of the seeing that stamp up there reminded me of something that I had there. I seem to remember, and I may be corrected, but you can follow it up if necessary, that the Japanese had two ways of dating things, and one was the Christian way of dating since before Christ and after Christ. But the other way of dating things was from either the birth on or the accession of the emperor of Japan.
Yeah.
And around about 1942 may have been 17 years since the current emperor
I think so.
was inaugurated.
Yeah, I think that would be the case.
Yeah, there's a, you may hear that from somebody else, which may prompt you to check it out, but it sort of clears up a bit of the fog.
Yes, no, well, my neighbour said that her mother was born in whatever, 16, and she was born in 1941, so, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Talk about those caves in Rabaul. I've been in them.
Wow, Jack.
Yeah, and that would have been in the mid-70s, early 70s. No, hang on, Paul. Oh, there you go, mid-70s. And at the end, the Rabaul airstrip wasn't far from the centre. The caves are between Rabaul and on the road to Cockapoo, further down. And when there was the threat of the eruption, this is going back, not before the big eruption, we moved all our staff and all our lot of accommodation to Cockapoo. And we had in the airport was still a lot of shot down aircraft, both Japanese and Americans, and they were still there in few. And in the caves itself, there were barges. There still were barges that had been stripped completely, but there were just barges there. And they were about the width of this, from about here to the wall, and the height from about here to that. So there was substantial caves, yeah.
So did they build the caves, or were the caves there?
Sorry?
Did they build the caves, or were the caves already
No,
there?
well, I think there might have been some caves there, a part of it, but they would have excavated more and go further into the rock, which will fall,
Something I probably should add, a couple of months after Jim's passing, I caught up with his son, and neither I mentioned, but Jim's son and Jim's father were all Australian champion wrestlers, which was pretty good. And I caught up with Noel, that's Jim's son, and spent a couple of hours with him, and was fantastic because I'm trying to learn things like him, and he's asking me questions about people out of Port that related to him too. We never met. That was just a beautiful couple of hours. And lovely man.
So Margaret, you were going to say something?
Oh, just that a lot of the volcanic rock around Rabaul is very porous, so it wouldn't have been difficult
To tunnel.
It's that's its nature.
Yeah, so it's, we're lucky we have two people who lived in PNG, so they can tell us these things.
Thank you. Let's give them all another round of applause. Well, that brings our meeting to a close, and you realise that we are meeting in here because we have to maintain our social distance. In the rooms where we normally meet, I've checked and we really can have no more than 15 people in there. So I think we'll be meeting in the auditorium unless we're told we're not allowed to meet at all, and then it'll be online again. But I think we'll be meeting in the auditorium for the next couple of months at least. So thank you all very much for coming. You're allowed to chat with each other, but we can't provide supper. And have an enjoyable evening, stay COVID safe, and thank you for coming.